everybody. I'm Raina from Blue Cypress Books, and welcome to Book Banter. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. I will be talking tonight to Emma Brodie, who has spent over a decade in book publishing. She's currently at Little Brown, and this is her debut novel. We will be talking about Songs in Ursa Major, which just came out in paperback, whose cover looks totally different than this one. This is my art from way back in the day. I loved this book from the minute that I first read it, and when I was reliving it recently, prepping for this event, I fell in love with it all over again. I am going to click the button and welcome Emma into the room. Hi, Emma.
Hi, Raina. How are you?
Oh, very good. How are you this evening?
I'm very well. So happy to be here. Thanks for the kind words. Yeah, that's Freddie.
It's adorable.
Yeah, he knows it.
I love when people put their animals in their bio, especially when they put their names, because I think it tells a lot about like the people or the family that animal is now a part of. Because your dog's name is Freddie Mercury, which I love.
Yeah. He has so much personality. Like my husband always says TGIF, thank God I'm Freddie, because he gets a lot, like he gets everything. So yeah, and I guess like I just think it's hilarious that we have a dog named Freddie Mercury and he totally lives up to it. So if you write a book about music, why not include your Freddie Mercury dog in the bio, right?
Exactly. And when we first got our dog, and our dog is like about 8 now, we said, oh, no, nothing's on the table. We had all this like long list of rules. It's like before you become a parent, like you have this long list of rules you're definitely going to adhere to. And our dog is the same way. Like Maggie gets whatever she wants, whenever she wants it. She sleeps with my son. She like gets table scraps every day. Sometimes she even gets her own little plate. I haven't gone that far, but other members of my house have.
I respect it. I really do. Yeah. The bedroom is Freddie's like slow campaign. Like he's allowed in if he cries in the middle of the night. So we go to bed, he goes in his crate, and then it could be like an hour later and he starts crying, he's allowed to come in. So we used to be stricter. I totally feel you. It all just goes right out the window. They're just really cute.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So with the dog's name and with your theme of book, are you a big music lover?
Oh, yeah. I am definitely a big music lover. I always disappoint people when they ask me about what I'm listening to because I'm not a snob at all, which I feel like writing a book inspired by Joni Mitchell like could have fooled you. But I'm listening to the Moana soundtrack on repeat right now. I'm just really feeling that. Like I listen to everything. And my mom is an opera singer, so I grew up listening to a lot of NPR, love public radio. Like I was the second grader that like couldn't have told you like anything pop, but I was like, oh, that's Rimsky-Korsakov. And then I think because I was sort of like late to come to pop, I've always just like fetishized it a bit. Like I'm still obsessed with all the bubblegum pop from the early 90s. Like my husband was listening to grunge at that time. He's like, you and I had very different 90s. I'm like, yeah, I know, but these are my 90s. These NSYNC songs are my 90s. So, that basically holds true for pop of any era. Like I love modern pop. I love past pop, which is what JT and Joni were back in the day. So yeah, I'm my Spotify list at the end of last year congratulated me that I listened to 32 different genres. So
That's impressive. I don't know. I've not used Spotify. Like I've never had my own account, so I've never gotten one of those end of the year like playlist things with these breakdowns. And every time people start posting them on their social media, I'm jealous. Like, oh, this will be the year. Like, I'm gonna do that. But I'd love to see just how many I listen to. I have no idea. I like to think I'm more eclectic than I probably am.
No, you definitely are. I mean, it's such a clever piece of marketing on their part that they do that because like even if you're not subscribing, you're like, oh, now I really want to know what my aura color was this year. And like, yeah, I my thing is I always listen to one song on repeat for like a week, and I listen to it until it's like a husk, and then I move on to the next thing. And so when I go back to those playlists, it's like your top song this year, and it's like a song that I listened to like 400 times from like January 1st until February 1st, and then forgot about. And I'm like, oh, I guess this did represent my whole year, even though that was just a very intense phase at the moment.
I'm very similar when I listen to music. I'll listen to the same couple of songs or the same album just until I'm just done with it. And then just move on. But if I go back, I know all the words, and most other people are just like, you know.
But it also, I'm sure like this happens to you as well. You know, if you do that kind of listening, whatever you're listening to gets imbued with whatever place you're in at that moment or whatever moment's happening in your life. And I think it becomes like a sense memory, the way that perfume can be. Like you, like certain, like Sarah Jarosz, like I associate her so strongly with like summer of 2020, driving around Connecticut. We were like newly out of New York, and just like, I can be anywhere. I could be in New York. I could be in Antarctica. And if I hear, you know, Build Me Up from Bones, I'm back in Lakeville, Connecticut. And I think that is such a powerful, cool thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely have albums like that where I remember where I bought them back on CD. Like, I remember my son is just getting into the Gorillaz, and my husband and I bought that album when we went to Portland to visit his parents before we were married. Like, and we were both like instantly in that space and telling our son this story, which he's like, what is? Like, okay, thanks. Old people, CDs, you know, whatever. But like, it is instantly we're back in that space.
Sorry, Freddie's having some emotions.
It's right, no worries. So let's answer this question Linda has before we get a little bit more into the book and what it's all about. Yeah. Do you play any instruments?
I'm a lapsed violinist. I played the violin from like 10 to 17, basically. And I have a very strong ear, but I never learned to properly read music. I get sort of anxious when it's happening. Like, I'm sure I could figure it out, but like time signatures make me anxious. And I did Suzuki, so that worked because it's an ear learning method. And then I just, you know, when I got to college, I joined an a cappella group, which was perfect because it was really social. And I could just hear the part one time, and then I would never have to read the music. So I would just stand next to whoever the strong singer was in my section, listen like while she sight read it, and then I would just kind of go from there. So I haven't really, like, in my 20s and my 30s, like I haven't like done anything with it aside from write this book, but I could probably make it through a like easier piece on the violin.
Well, if you can listen to, you know, you're playing or by ear, you might be able to sit down in front of a piano and pick something out too. I don't know if you've ever tried it, but the piano's great for that.
I think the piano is amazing. Like, we grew up with pianos in my home, so I've always liked to kind of mess around, but for whatever reason, like I just never took lessons. But yeah, anything in that key of C, I can definitely try to like sound it out.
So is that musical background part of what inspired you to write a book that is so heavily music, you know, involves music, or is that just a time period of music you love, or what?
You know,
what inspired the book?
Yeah, what a great question. So many things. So, you know, my first story idea around this book was just basically like the Quinn family. I knew I wanted to write like a matriarchal clan on an island, sort of like Martha's Vineyard. And I like, that just seemed like a dream. Like, they have, you know, property that they own, they're financially independent. Like, if they bomb in their careers, they can always go home and work at the family hair salon. Like, there's just like some nice sort of like fantasy padding there. And so that was like the first piece I had. And then as I was sort of making up this family, like I was thinking about Martha's Vineyard, where James Taylor and Carly Simon have a huge like mythological presence. And I loved the idea of like this island kind of bearing witness to this legendary love story. And I was really interested in it. And I wasn't sure if it was going to be like a contemporary piece where like the parents were those figures. And I started kind of researching and realized that like actually they were more interesting than the sort of like contemporary thinly veiled me version of the protagonist. So I sent the whole timeline back. And while I was researching Carly, and she didn't really fit. Like they're obviously like Jane, my character, is completely fictional, but like, it's not my time period. I'm not a musician. I wanted to understand what it would have been like at the time. And basically, as I was reading about Carly Simon, I learned that James Taylor had dated Joni Mitchell right before her. And suddenly I was like, my brain just went completely on fire. Like I could not believe that they had dated. Like I know they're contemporaries of each other. Sorry. But I didn't know that they had had any influence on each other's careers whatsoever. Like I think of Joni as this like revolutionary, and JT is like, like the PBS guy who I love, but it turns out he was actually like a smoking hot rebel back in his youth. And from there, I just started listening to the two albums they had written kind of about each other, Blue and Mudslide Slim and the Blue Horizon. And that was it. That was anything I could find. Like there were no articles, there was nothing. And it's interesting because since Ursa came out, Ursa pubbed on the 50th anniversary of Blue, like to the day.
Oh, wow.
So much has been written about JT and Joni because both of them have done PR to celebrate the 50th anniversaries of those albums. So this relationship, which was like very under the radar for a long time, is now like, they're talking about it more openly. But when I was writing the book, I was just listening to their music and trying to figure out like, okay, what happened? And if this, then this, and this, then this. And I mean, the whole thing's made up. So at a certain point, it has nothing to do with them anymore. But that was sort of the kernel. If I'm shaking, it's because Freddie has handed me an elephant and I'm now playing tug as well. But I'd rather
Yeah. You're doing an excellent job.
Yeah.
Well, that time period of music is fascinating to me for sort of like my family is a musical family. So my mom and dad were both in a band, and they were in a band in the 60s and 70s. So yeah, and they were touring all around, and a rock and roll band. So I live in this like sort of fantasy world of sort of half real life stories that I've gotten from my family, and then half like books and movies and all of this stuff, So immediately, when I heard what your book was about, I was like, well, obviously I'm going to read that. So like, I'm in. But what's fascinating to me about you're talking to me about it now is that it was sparked by something I wouldn't have thought of at all, which is the family, Jane's family life on the island that isn't necessarily musical. They turn out to be, but like you said, they don't have to be at all. And I love that family dynamic where you're right, they do have this sort of safety net to come back to, but also they're so supportive of each other. Like they tell each other what they think. They're like, I don't know if that's a good idea. You shouldn't probably be doing that, but okay. But they're super supportive of each other, like unflinchingly supportive. And then this real life love story that you sort of had to piece together, like by listening to albums back and forth and just like imagining these pieces. And that's fascinating that it's so much based on a true story and yet so completely made up because there's not a lot of documentation for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a real mix. Like I feel like it's almost like one of those gardening projects where like there was a trellis to begin with, but it's so old and the plants have become so intense that it's actually just part of the plants now. Like it's completely broken down and the plants are like growing into the trellis. So yeah, I can still recognize JT and Joni in the characters, particularly when they're performing. Like, so much of their stage personas and their physicality is taken from like the footage that I watched. And it's such a pleasure to research that time period. Like, I don't know if there are tapes of your parents, but that would be amazing. But it's like a time when you can see video, like you can see video of 20-year-old JT. So it's lovely to have that available and not just to have to read about it. Like, you can write your own impressions of it. Whereas even 10 years earlier, the footage is so scarce. So I really enjoyed getting to see them, and those aspects really inspired it. But like, yeah, the rest, like the family stuff, like I guess Jesse like pairs slightly more with JT. Like, James Taylor's father is a doctor, and so is Jesse's. But yeah, Joni Mitchell, like, according to her biographers, like raised herself in her view. Like, she grew up in the prairies, like not an island. She felt very isolated as a very young person. And so, yeah, she's very different from Jane.
Well, you do a good job like piecing that together, because Jane has this great support structure, and she does have a lot of close family members, but at the same time, due to her mom, the situation that has happened with her mother, she does in a lot of ways feel like she kind of raised herself or was pieced together that childhood in a way that sets her up, I think, to succeed or push back in an industry. Push back in an industry that's not built to even listen to her, that's really built to use her as a pretty picture.
Totally. I mean, that's the challenge of Jane, is like, you want her to have enough security in her upbringing that it's justified that she would be this like absolute feminist gladiator when she's dealing with these super sexist producers, but you want her to be insecure enough that she still wants to be famous. So it's sort of like having both things. And like, the way I did that, as you're alluding to, is I had her mom is someone she's gone. She was raised by her aunt and her grandmother. And so she feels supported, but she also doesn't take for granted like that she has a place. Like, she's always wanting to impress her aunt and her grandmother and make sure that she can, call home. So I think that comes to be more prevalent as the novel progresses. Like, initially it's just this very warm environment, but then as you get to know Jane, and as Jane has to get to know herself better, she starts to like piece through like the different dynamics that she has between herself and her aunt, which is a different relationship than she has with her cousin and her grandmother. And I think that's how it is for all of us. Like, if we have the pleasure of having a family we get along with, at a certain point, we all have to come to terms with the fact that family isn't perfect. So it's, yeah, very human.
Well, and she learns how to, it comes into her own, I guess, inside the music industry. And a lot of times you'll read books or you see things in real life and you go, oh, I wouldn't have done that. That was a bad decision. Like, why are you doing that? But in Jane's situation, a lot of times these little decisions seem much bigger because she's getting this record deal, or is she getting a record deal, or does she still have a record deal? Should she play the song? Should she stand where they tell her to? Should she date who they tell her to? Or is she going to push back and make her own thing, her own space? And we do that. Everybody does that. We have these moments in our lives, especially, in our like early 20s, in our whole 20s. Let's go to the whole 20s, where we have to figure those things out for ourselves. And she's kind of in this position where she's given this opportunity to make this album and do this tour, and now all of these things, these moments, do I stand up and be who I think I should be and what I think for the world, or do what I'm told, or make a better business decision, or whatever? And she's out there in a way most of us aren't, that having to make those decisions. How did you relate to that, or maybe get inside the music industry to put her in those positions?
Such a good question. So I work in book publishing. I'm a book editor, which I think of book publishing as like mutually intelligible with the record business. Like, honestly, like if it hadn't been for MTV, like the music would still be marketed the same way we market books. And I think that gave me sort of an insight into Willie's character. He's Jane's A&R man. He's her label rep. And I think that, you know, a lot of the book is about like what makes a timeless piece of art. Like, is it the label and them creating, like, they wouldn't have used this word in 69, but discoverability? Or is it the art itself? Like, will the cream rise to the top? And Jane is a true believer in the idea that like her talent will prevail. And she bets on herself time and time again. Even when like big scary people are telling her that she has to do what they say and she's out of chances, like her integrity it's almost self-sabotaging, but it's amazing to watch. And Willie, her A&R man, is the opposite. So whereas Jane kind of comes by her talent and her relationship to the music industry as like a sort of revenge thing, like her mom was screwed over, for lack of a more eloquent phrase, as a songwriter. And so Jane comes to it very defensive. Willie's dad owns like a giant media label, and Willie and all of his brothers are label execs. So he comes to it as sort of part of the establishment. And there's like, it's one of my favorite relationships in the book, because the tension between the two of them is essentially Willie rooting for Jane while also knowing that if Jane succeeds and does break out without the label support, that threatens the power of the label. And so, yeah, it's I've actually come to relate to Jane much more since having my book come out, and appreciate what it's like to have your name on something. Because when I wrote this, I was basically a spectator. Like, I'd been editing books for 10 years and I've watched many go on sale, and like I have been close to projects and felt for the authors, but it's very different when it's you. And the experience of being that vulnerable, like I think a lot of people think about criticism, but it's really like the vulnerability of like putting your heart and soul into something and having no one notice, like just having this thing go out into the world and no one realizes that it happened, and having to come to terms with your own like insignificance. I think that's a much bigger risk that people don't necessarily see, or I didn't necessarily see it as clearly until I was like in the midst of it. And it gives you a tremendous appreciation for the courage of creators. Like, I think about David Bowie sometimes. Like, he's an example of someone who had like 7 bands before he actually like struck it. And just like the relentless, like not giving up. Like, there are only so many romantic situations where like Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel like met each other in the neighborhood and then became famous best friends. Like, that's so not the norm. So yeah, it's just, it's fascinating. Like, there's no one path.
Absolutely. What you're saying right there is definitely a misunderstood part about music. Like, everyone knows the romantic story. Oh, they were friends in high school and played in that guy's garage for 5 years until they, that's generally not how the band as you know it now is. The one playing on the radio has been pieced together from, maybe 2 of them are friends, and the rest of them have been pieced together over time, and that's how they made it. And so we only remember those romantic stories. But the same thing happens with authors as well. You know people that have written a billion novels, or people who have one and somehow it made this amazing impact on the world. But most people have written like quite a few, and then, hey, look, here's this one everyone knows about, and then you find out there's these other ones that you didn't even know existed. And I'm reading your bio too, and you're like, that you've written over 20 gift books and games and stuff like that. That's writing. That counts. I mean, it's not a novel. This is your first novel, but all of that, and so if you go back and you list these things, that's all this writing you've done and all of this work in the book industry you've done, and then this is your first novel. So there's so much. It's like the iceberg, pictures of an iceberg. Everybody always says you see this much and then there's this much, and then sometimes that's like the work that went into it, or how many years you've been working in this same, working your way up to getting to this novel, and that.
Absolutely. I think that's so well said.
So Linda has one more question. Do you still participate in an a cappella group?
No. We do
Would
a
you?
reunion concert every 5 years, so I'll be going back in a couple years, but I don't participate anymore. I follow my former a cappella group on Instagram. They're the JHU Mental Notes, and they're adorable.
Ooh, okay, I'm writing this down. JQ mental note.
Notes, yep, mental notes.
Got it. Okay, I'm gonna look that up later. That's happening.
It's not a
And then I
cappella
get
if
to-
it doesn't have a ridiculous name, so
That's part of the fun. You get to make up the ridiculous name.
exactly.
Yeah, well, I got to keep my eye on that too, because if you go back for a reunion in a few years, then you'll eventually end up on their Instagram, and we all need that in our life. This is remember this book, and then acapella. I'm gonna keep it. I love it. So, are you working on anything else? And will it be music inspired?
So I have a draft of something, but I'm not happy with it. And the current draft does have some musical influence, but I have moved away from it. So we'll see. Like, it's too early to share, mostly because if I change my mind and need to like backpedal on the whole thing, then there won't be a record of me like saying what it's about on the internet. But it's a process. It's interesting. Like, I'm hoping what you're saying about like all the other product isn't true. Like, I do think that, like, there are sort of levels, and then there are projects, and it's like you have to complete like whatever 10,000 hours seems to be the popular figure quoted about mastery in order to like become a proficient at something. So hopefully I've done my 10,000 hours, and that can just apply to all the other books, and I don't have to do another 10,000 hours to get to the second book.
Yes.
We'll see how it goes.
Well, I love when you surprise readers with the rest of the book a person has written, because you never know which one is going to be the one that a particular reader discovers, right?
Totally.
So when your next book comes out, there's going to be a bunch of people who don't know anything about this first book, because they'll get the publicity and they'll see it for the new book. And that is so much fun to me when they come out, oh, I loved this one. I'm like, oh, you did? Well, did you know she has another book? And they're like, what? And that's because you do. They'll their eyes will light up. Tons of people Google things, but there's a lot of people who don't, or with certain things don't. And I find that with readers sometimes, where they'd rather come back. If they have a bookstore that they know and booksellers that they trust, and that they're getting recommendations from us on a regular basis, they won't even like Google it. They'll just be like, oh, I like that one you showed me. And then I can show them, I can see that moment when their face lights up with a book that's similar to one, or another book by the same author, and they're like, I had no idea. I was like, yes, I got you.
That is so inspiring, honestly, because I feel like there's so much psychologically as an author about getting your first book published. It's like that's the arrival moment where, like, and if you look at like authors' books, like you see the acknowledgments for book one are like, thank you for my whole life. And then book two is like, thank you to my editor. Like, it's like, it's just this big transformative like acceptance where I think it means more than it should. Probably to me, but I think gearing up for the second book, it's like there's a lot less out there about the second book. Like, there's support groups and writing groups that will help you find an agent and find your first book, but like that transition from like first time author to second time author, I think is challenging. It's challenging from a business perspective, it's challenging as a writer, like the whole thing. So I absolutely love that idea of like, it's just a second debut. There are going to be people that haven't heard of you. Like, it's fine. Like, it's just, I love that. That's so like freeing and cool.
Oh, well, I'm glad I could help. It's absolutely true. I mean, there's new people discovering your book with you with every book that you put out. And I think that's probably the same way with a lot of albums and stuff. If an album takes 5 years for your next album to come out, then there are people who were 10 or 11 couldn't buy their own albums, didn't have a phone to download things to, then in 5 years are 16 and are doing whatever they want with that phone. And now all of a sudden your album came out and it's showing up at the top of Spotify or iTunes or whatever, and they download it and discover you have one that came out 5 years ago. Like, there's no way they would know that unless their parents listened to it,
I love
so
that.
there you go.
I love that.
Music.
I love that. So
Backlist
good.
is also one of my favorite things to sell to people, because I can sneak up on them with it, because again, the new things are at the top of all of the advertisements there. Most of what is spaced out when people just go around looking. But you tell me you liked fill in the blank new book, and I love going back. And I'm like, look, this came out 8 years ago and you haven't read it. You need to read this. Like, they're all connected.
I love it. Well, and that's why booksellers are the best and so important. Like, it's just that relationship is unreplaceable. And it's just everything to an author. Like, having someone like you love my book is like the best honor, and also like the best thing for the health of the book. So it's just such an important thing, and it's vital, just absolutely vital.
One of the things that I love about doing Book Banter, and I've been doing it pretty much since COVID started, is being able to show everybody like how much it takes and all of the pieces that it takes, and between like the two of us, we've got from like writing it down on the page to getting it in the customer's hands. I mean, almost every single piece somewhere represented, and that's like, it takes a lot to get that book into somebody's hand, and then get followers and people who love it. But I don't know. I think this is an amazing addition to books in general, and I can't wait to see what the next thing is, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Me too.
So I'm gonna follow. My last question is for you to give me a few songs that aren't Joni or JT, because those are easy ones that you love, or that helped you when you were writing this book. Things you were listening to, like a playlist, for example, but a couple.
Okay, great. Okay, so there is a Songs in Ursa Major playlist, but it's like the public facing one that's like all very like historically vetted. So I also had a secret playlist that was called Island Story. And so I had, all right, John Martin's Run Honey Run is this really underrated, like, I feel like he didn't really cross the Atlantic, but he's an amazing folk artist of the same, he's Irish. But he has almost like, I don't know. His guitar parts are incredible. So Run Honey Run, so good. I listened a lot to the Uptown Girls soundtrack while I was writing Ursa Major. You're getting like the deep cut. So it's so good. So it's like this really bad Brittany Murphy movie with Dakota Fanning, and she is like the daughter of a record exec who discovers this like really amazing guy and is like kind of his muse. And so there are two original songs in that movie that I listen to constantly, Molly Smiles, and I also had a song in the book called Sylvie Smiles, who is about Sylvia Plath, completely different thing. But the title was kind of a nod to that. And what was the other one? Sheets of Egyptian Cotton. And I just was thinking about it because it's a movie that talks a lot about like songs and the composition of songs for a popular audience from the business perspective, because everyone is connected to the industry, and it's modern, it's bad, but I listen to it a lot. So that one's those two are kind of like counterintuitive secret Ursa songs that have nothing to do with the time period. I also, yeah. I listen to Freebird a lot, thinking about like Jane's band, The Breakers, playing a lot of Grace Slick, thinking about The Breakers, which has a total different vibe. Like the idea of Jane being the lead in this rock band, that music has nothing to do with James Taylor and Joni Mitchell. So there's like a whole portion of the book, which is like basically until chapter 25, when Jane is doing like rock and roll music. And I was thinking a lot about like other female rocker bands as opposed to like solo folk artists. So yeah, White Rabbit, like I think about that song all the time when I think about Ursa Major.
I love that. I'm gonna look up there's two movies, right?
Yeah.
With I'm gonna look those up because I don't think I've seen either one of them. I'm a very visual person, so I hear the titles, but like until I Google the cover or the poster or something, sometimes I don't know exactly.
Uptown Girl, you'll know you found it when you see Brittany Murphy holding like a second grade Dakota Fanning in like a backpack.
I feel like I've seen that one. The Sheets of Egyptian Cotton, that doesn't sound.
Oh, that's the song in Uptown Girl. That's not, yeah, don't worry, you're never going to find
it. I've not heard of that movie.
No, that's the song that she inspires. They like have a night together in Sheets of Egyptian Cotton, and then his breakout song, which she finds out after he breaks up with her, is Sheets of Egyptian Cotton. And he didn't think it needed a pop chorus, and she was the one who told him that it needed a hook. And then he did it, and he became a star.
Oh, of course. Typical. Exactly.
It's fine. She learned her passion was designing jackets, so it's okay.
Well, yeah, okay. I'm going to watch this, and it is going to be highly entertaining. I know what I'm getting into now. I'm just zone out entertainment. That's all that I need.
It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. And the songs kind of rock. Like Molly Smiles, which is the later one, absolutely rocks. So you'll enjoy it.
All right. Well, now we have book recommendations, movie recommendations. We're good to go.
Perfect. And I feel inspired to write a new book.
Yes. Don't give up. Sit on it, pull it apart, re-edit it, whatever it takes. Put it together, put it out. We will read it. The world needs it.
Yay.
And I'm going to put the link to order Emma's book right here in the comments. So you can use that anytime, 24/7 on our website, and we will get her book shipped out to you anywhere you are. And thank everyone for joining us, everybody who watched, Linda who commented, and Emma, thank you so much for joining me for Book Banter this evening. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me. The best. Yay.